All right, it's your boy Jay Barber back with you, Studio Noize, the voice of Black art coming at you. Live from the Black Art America Gallery show. Rhythm and Flow is up right now featuring abstract work, so make sure y'all stop by the gallery. But today, got extra special guests with us. We talk about this right here. This book that y'all see, Shifting Time.
African-American artists.
African-American artists, 2020 to 2021. A great book put together by my man, Berrisford Boothe and Klare Scarborough. We got Berrisford Boothe, a professor at Lehigh University in Art and Africana Studies, founding and principal curator of the Petrucci Family Foundation Collection of African American art. Make sure I get all that, and then make sure you know who he is. Yeah, and then we got Klare Scarborough, curator and former museum director, also influential, very crucial to this project. Go ahead and say hi to the people, won't y'all?
Hey, what's up? It's good to meet y'all. It's good to be here with Jamal. Hopefully we can bring you something interesting to pique your interest in our project, which is a passion project.
Oh yeah, it's definitely going to be that, because this book right here is something else. I get a lot of art books. I want y'all to know I get a lot of art books, and this is up there with all the rest of them that you ever seen. Okay. Cataloging
so like let me pressure you. What was different about it?
To me, the difference was how it was put together, because a lot of books that you have such a specific focus, right? Mm-hmm. And this book has a specific focus too, but you're bringing in so many other voices, and you get to hear from personal experiences of not just behind the art, but what inspired the art. Right. And so I think that part of it is different about it, because you get a very enthusiastic look into what people were going through at the time, and I think that's different for you to see it, to see people reflecting on their specific emotions when they created these pieces during this time, how the times are directly influencing what is being made. And so I say here on the podcast a lot that we don't really know what we've been through yet in terms of COVID and what's happening. And so this book is, to me, one of the first, I think, in a salvo of books that'll come in the future.
The first.
Yes.
That's what we were proud of, Jamal. We want to make sure we had the first book.
Yeah, it definitely is. But first, introduce yourselves, let everybody know who y'all are, and recognize the voices and all that good stuff.
Klare, please.
Like I mentioned, I'm a former museum director and a curator, arts consultant. I teach as an adjunct. This was a great project to embark on for so many reasons. It was timely, and people seem to be asking for it, demanding it even. You know, the artists I've talked with all seem to want something, some record. And so I put books together before, I've curated before, and I have a lot of friends within the community, including Berrisford, who was the perfect colleague, perfect collaborator for this project. Berrisford, maybe you can jump off from there.
Sure. Well, I mean, let's just, great, as I'm fond of saying, great thing about the truth is you ain't got to rehearse it. Klare, I had first gotten together with, as we were saying before we went on air, for a magnificent project for one of the most powerful and underrated artists in America, but specifically Black female artists, and that's Barbara Jane Bullock outside of Philadelphia, who's been in the game for 50 years plus, and whose work should be in every museum, major museum in the country and the world, and isn't. And the title again, Klare, was
Chasing After Spirits.
Chasing After Spirits. And Barbara, I refer to as Miss Barbara because she's just my big sister, my mother, my lover, everything. She's part of that generation that set the table for the rest of us, and put us in place to be able to keep lifting our culture up and lifting our voices up. And so I might have to repeat this. We did that, and so we were talking about Chasing After Spirits with Barbara Bullock, and what an amazing book that was, and how Barbara is basically a high priestess of Black art. And I encourage all the listeners to go and to Google her and look up the book and actually get that book if you can. It's a perfect example of Klare's work. And then I started talking about myself, Jamal, that my origin stories are I'm originally born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. Came to America in 1971. Grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, large Jamaican West Indian community. And long story short, wound up, the little brother of a very good artist who was like as good as Charles White, but turned into a Rastafari and said he ain't going to stay and made art for white people. Went back to a lot of trees and sadly lost him a couple of years ago. But he was my first inspiration. I'm proud to say that my first relationship with the visual arts was not through institutions, was not through the inspiration of any particular artist that was established. It was as a small child, having an older brother who was so disconnected from the ordinary that he would do these remarkable drawings and paintings. And I was captivated by that, but I dare not call myself an artist. So, swinging that arc forward, I wound up going to college for architecture, but then ultimately became a visual artist, went to the Maryland Institute, got my master's, won a fellowship, traveled to Europe, came back and built a career. And then I wound up teaching for nearly 30 years at Lehigh, building programs and so forth. So while I was doing all that, I was also building my own career as a painter, as a printmaker, as an installation artist. I've had installations at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philly. I've done print residencies across the country. I showed at June Kelly for a little while in my early 30s in New York on Broadway, which was fun. And then I'm also an obsessive photographer. I didn't go to school for photography, but I find that the connection between all that I just said and my childhood is that I always saw the world a little different. And I really want to talk to, especially younger people tuning into the podcast, that if you know and you realize that you see the world differently, photography is a great way to document that and give yourself legitimacy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not about whether or not you can show them or you're a great photographer or whatever. None of that makes any difference. I think the most important thing that we'll touch on, and that really comes back to shifting time, is, we like to talk about freedom. We like to talk about liberty. We like to talk about our own vision and our, we want to demand our authenticity. Well, how do you know what that is unless you chronicle it, right?
Right.
So if you just take your digital camera, everybody's, Instagram rules the world, but that's one thing to take images of yourself with makeup and at fancy places and of your food. It's another thing to use your camera to teach yourself and to teach others about how you perceive the world. Since there's no one's going to tell you that's wrong, it's your vision. And I think one of the things that's really important in the art game going forward, especially now we're talking about AI and all this other stuff, is authenticity. Mm-hmm. What is authentically you? That's what's going to be challenged by technology. When Photoshop and computers came in, people were like, well, it can't be authentic if you can make 1 million of them. Yes, it can. Books, you can make 1 million of them. They're authentic, right? But I think we're being pushed away from looking at our own lives, no matter how dire, no matter how different, whether it's centered in the Black community, whether it crosses other lines. There's everybody has a way of interacting with the world. And I think photography, outside of trying to be a photographer, is a great way, and it's been used a lot, especially in the hood, to get young kids to be proud of how they see the world. And that goes right back to shifting time, because that's what the book was about. It was about how these artists of color saw the world during this unprecedented time.
And so let me read the quick blurb right quick about Shifting Time, African-American Artist 2020 through 2021. Explores how contemporary Black artists responded to the emotional and cultural challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, social justice movements, political upheaval during this critical period of turmoil and uncertainty. And I think that's a great way to start the conversation, because as you're saying, artists are using all these different methods and techniques. It's like sensors. There's a lot of input coming in to determine what the output is. And I think you have a direct correlation to the experience and the happenings of this particular time period to the artwork that was produced inside of it?
Well, I mean, I've always told my students after 30 years plus of teaching, I started teaching when I was a junior in college, and I've always tried to change the script, Jamal, and remind people that we're looking through the wrong end of the telescope a lot when we talk about visual arts, because we think art is output, art is input.
Yeah.
You know, people just don't understand. They want to be great. They want to be famous. They want to be whatever based on what they're outputting. But that's not what's critical to a sustained and successful career as an artist, whether you make a lot of money or not, you know, because if you're not inputting, if you're not absorbing music and culture and what's happening in your hood, in your house, in your heart, in your brain, then whatever you're putting out may be beautiful, but I don't think it's going to be impactful. I think we've got to be careful in this age of everybody, you know, being a influencer or whatever.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Influencing what? Yeah.
Right. Do you. What are you saying? Like Bob Marley says at the end of, what is that song? Could You Be Loved? Right. He doesn't say anything. He says, say something, say something, say something. And again, back to shifting time, Klare, you know, had a brilliant idea, which was sort of, again, tethered to some of the things I was doing, which is trying to reconstruct community, right, Jamal? I mean, we all remember that, you know, we woke up on March 13th or thereabout 2020, and people just like some kind of dystopian dream. People said,
suddenly you're by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you cannot go outside. You cannot talk to people. You got to wash your groceries. You got, you know, we were like, and just think about how messed up things were before that. You know, think about how, you know, how many hashtags of Black Lives, you know, were already in play. Think about tensions. Think about inept political leadership. Think about America staring at its navel and trying to figure out who the hell it was and who the hell it wants to be. And then all of a sudden somebody wakes up and says, oh, and by the way, you cannot have community. Yeah. That's all we have. The church, the community, you know, and we couldn't have it, not just on a broader thing, but locally and individually. So, you know, if you're not being authentic during that time, I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, just this idea of community, I think, is very important because this really, the book was sourced from the artists. It was really made up of contributions from the community. It was the call for participation went out to kind of the community. It was word of mouth, but it was also emails sent around to various dealers, and so we certainly ended up we did target towards the end, of course, but you know, this whole idea of creating a book that's also kind of I guess a time capsule of community voices, of basically artist voices and artist images that will continue to exist, that artists can refer back to, that the wider public can kind of share too. Yeah, it's not just what artists experience; it's what, you know, we all experience as human beings living through COVID.
Yeah, and let me press you, Jamal, because I mean, it's one thing for us to say, but we sent you a copy of the book and you had a chance to look through it. You know, I like the way what you said at the beginning, because we went out of our way not to make this a scholarly exercise for artists alone, because the art game often does that. You know, we say we want everybody to love us, and then we write this encrypted stuff where only like certain small percentage of people understand half the words, and then we wonder why people aren't interested in these art books. Yeah. So it was very important, and you know, I really give Klare credit for this, for coming up with an idea where we said what we had to say as the co-editors, as the people who are going to put the thing together with a certain kind of structure. But you know, it was really important that we gave the artists freedom to submit. I think initially it was like 3 pieces, and then, you know, we took it down and used from some artists. We used more for the cover, for divider leaves and so forth. But fundamentally, you know, the question was, you know, what was going on for you? Not what was going on for you based on your work looking like this or that. Yeah. Right. It was like, what was going on for you? And we weren't sure exactly what we were going to get, which is lovely, because that's the way I make my art. Any real artist knows you go in your studio, you have an idea, but you best be ready to listen to the spirits or it's not going to work.
Yeah, you got to follow the work. Yeah.
You got to be vulnerable to things you don't understand yet. You got to be, ready for not yetness. Things will happen, but not yet. And I think that was very much the philosophy behind this book as we went day to day, week to week, and things started coming in. The book began to move us towards its final form. Is that fair?
That's true.
Claire?
That's true. I mean, it's interesting when things started coming in. We started looking at layout because, I mean, one benefit to editing, co-editing, and designing is that we could look at the book in process, and we were able to figure out, well, for the catalog section, yeah, only only 2 per artist, but because we made a limit of 3, so we made some decisions that impacted how the book was structured, based on what our call for participation said. How many. We said 3, limit of 3, but some artists gave us 5. Some artists only gave us 2.
Artists never listen. Never listen and read it.
Only gave us 1, and I had to go and nudge them, come on, you got to give me more than 1.
Other artists, like my dear friend, and let me just with my heart call my mentee, Erlen Jaffrard, who's a brilliant artist. He just drove me crazy, but at the end, it turns out that he was driving us crazy because he's working at a big ass mural in the middle of Mexico City that's in the book that none of us anticipated.
Yeah.
And it's an absolute ornament for the book because it shows that, in a limited case, we had an artist who not only wasn't in the studio, but was in a foreign country working on a massive project during lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we couldn't have dreamt up. And I think I was starting to knock on the door of this before, is not only did we not know what was going to happen, and as Klare said, it helped us construct things like the timeline and things like the in memoriam, where we really tried to make sure that one of the things that was most difficult for everyone during COVID, which was, we were losing loved ones and we couldn't go to the funeral.
Yeah.
So it would be, reckless and negligent of us if we did a book that we didn't mention, losing David Driscoll. And sadly, since we put the book out, Bill Hudson, and sadly, Nelson Stevens, some of these other people that weren't even in the book. So, it was very important that the book felt like community, not just was a record or a time capsule of community, but that it had authentic voices. Mm-hmm. And that and this I think is a big selling point, that it wasn't really just for artists. We're really proud that this is a book that you can pick up, which, by the way, just FYI, we make no money off of this because we agreed to do this, as I said, as a labor of love and passion. And we were fortunate enough that the Petrucci Foundation that I worked at for 8 years was willing to put up and underwrite the publication of this. But the book is actually printed on call at Amazon Press. So we don't have a room full of books. But one of the things that we were really proud of is, that we've created a book that you can pick up, never have any idea about American art, contemporary art, Black American contemporary art, mm-hmm. but you know what happened to you during COVID. You know how you felt, because COVID was a mandate that was global, right? And it went against everything that everybody ever said could happen to the world. The world, according to capitalist structure, could not shut down. The world, according to the communist structure, Marxist, socialist, could not shut down. Somebody would be winning when everybody would be losing. We had this binary sense of our existence. It's white or black, north or south, Republican or this, Democrat. So there's always this binary. Conary is like, COVID came in, is like, hold my beer. I'm not playing that. Everybody goes down. And, we had trucks full of bodies. We had top-end nurses and doctors in garbage bags, PPE. We had all these new terms, essential workers. And then at the same time, I'm sorry, we had a crazy leader who was telling people to inject bleach and stuff like that.
Shine light on it. Yeah.
As you recall, I'm sure you've dealt with it in your program. We had a bunch of people, like every other week, somebody of color was being abused, most notably George Floyd and, Breonna, but a lot, everybody, so many other names. And, I've said this in previous interviews that we've had with Klare. I remember questioning my own authentic Blackness during that time, because they were flooding the zone with so much trauma, and I just kept saying, like, am I authentically Black if I can't remember all the hashtags.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
because I'm like, if I'm in conversation on a phone call or talking across the street to my neighbors or run into another African American artist, if I happen to go down to Philly and we're standing, you know, because I was still collecting art. So like when I went to Philanda's Thames' studio for the first time, we both had masks on. And we, you know, we would do the niceties, but then we had to talk about what was going on because we didn't have nobody to talk to about it.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking to myself, like,
That's
this
interesting.
is crazy. Is FT going to think like I'm not as black as I should be if I can't remember like the last 15 hashtags? So psychologically, this period was really a drain for everybody, but I think especially for artists of color, because we were already under the thumb of what America does to us all the time, and we get up and go to church anyways.
And let me offer this to you, is that it wasn't so much that it was a deluge that started because of COVID. I think it's a deluge that we noticed because of COVID. Because I don't think we notice how much we live with this kind of continuous trauma. Like I want to talk about the infinite scrolling on social media. It's an infinite scroll of, yeah, you know, it's booty shaking, and then it's, you know, this a little joke, and then it's a cat, but then it's black bodies. And then it's something else, and then something else, and then it's black bodies, and then there's somebody getting shot, and then there's somebody this, and then you know, back to booties again. Like it's kind of this thing that we had just gotten used to over time.
But
And
then
now
COVID
suddenly,
said, COVID said, stop.
COVID gave us,
you know,
COVID gave us a better sense of perspective, because sometimes as you're going and continuing on your trip, you don't realize how fast you're moving. You don't realize how fast and how much stuff is coming at you until you stop and really pay attention. I think that's what COVID showed to us a lot.
I completely agree, because COVID, were it not for COVID, the onslaught of news, in quotes, America, well, first of all, America doesn't have a memory. America's not proud of memory. America is proud of what's new. You know, what's new, what's trendy. I mean, you know, every 3 weeks, a new magazine is telling us what is new, sexually, fashion, food, haircuts, where to go to, you know. So there's this steady diet of, okay, what's next? And COVID said, oh, what's next? Death. What's next? Fear. What's next? You know, dread. And then all of a sudden we had, you know, Black Lives Matter, which happened, you know, started pre-COVID, but finally the world had the same 3 words on their lips, because the world, back to this, the world, you know, we had a situation where, again, not unlike when I first came to America back in the 70s, and Klare, you recall this one, we only had 3 newscasts, right? 3 stations.
Yeah.
I'm not saying those 3 stations were telling us the truth all the time, but at least we were plugged into the same wavelength of information before the news got fractured, and before Fox News became legit under the Reagan years as an entertainment / quote unquote news network, where they didn't have to have the fairness doctrine, which is saying that if they say some junk, they had to have somebody who could speak against it. So in the presence of all you talked about, and Klare and I have been talking about, and in the absence of any kind of real filter to tell us what's up, COVID came along and became this incredibly effective filter. You know what's going on in the world. We're all locking down. We're singing out our porches from nurses. We're losing our aunts and uncles and mothers of color who have to go out, and all of a sudden they're essential. They were fighting to pay them $7.25 before COVID. Then all of a sudden, I remember like a couple of months into COVID, I'm driving by Target and McDonald's, and they're offering $18 an hour. And I'm thinking, like everybody else, oh, so they could have been paying us that from the get-go, but we didn't know. So there's this reconciliation, right? Not a reckoning yet, but a reconciliation between what we were told we always had to be in a culture, what art had to be about, the commercial aspect of it. And then all of a sudden there was a reconciling of us going, no. My art can be about something else, and this something else is this moment in time, which I don't have any crib notes for. I don't have any cheat sheet for. And that was across the globe. So, we can't do a book from across the globe, but we thought it'd be an opportune time, Klare did, to look at I guess they would call it a control group or something like that in psychology. You know, a select amount of artists, a lot of whom I had worked with while I was collecting for the foundation with Jim Petrucci, and then my assistant Claudia Volpe, who's now the director. And you know, Jim, I guess, and Claudia saw the wisdom of this and helped underwrite this passion project that Klare and I, who were friends already before, but are better friends since, are just really proud to put in people's hands, because we feel everybody from a 10-year-old kid, 8-year-old kid, to an 80-year-old person can open the book, especially look at the timeline, look back day to day at what we had to absorb, ignore, just to keep going. So it proves a certain amount of strength and resilience for Americans in general, but in particular artists who had to look beyond all this trauma and dig within themselves to conjure up things to still bring us hope and still bring us, you know, beauty, and sometimes to talk to us about the reality of what was going on.
And I think we'll jump into some of the parts of the book a little bit, because you talked a little bit about the timeline. The book features 72 artists, 164 pieces of artwork, which is an incredible amount of stuff too. It gives you a wide sample size, right? And
Hands up, Klare. Klare
how
was
much is
that.
yeah, to how much was actually happening at the time, because artists, you know, as an artist, you make what you make. You never stop making, no matter what happens. And so even personally, I did stop making art for a little while because I didn't know what the actual value of having printed and working with paper and stacking all this stuff to the side and not knowing what was going to become of it. But that
See, I was you.
That didn't mean I stopped making.
I was you. I was you.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
just
like I was talking earlier about
changed what I was doing.
That's what that's why I was preaching that, because for me, exactly what you just said, brother Jamal, I couldn't, I felt like in Christian terms or gospel terms, I needed to witness. Like, it was so weird for me. I just wanted to get up every day and go, is this still happening? You know, is this still happening? But I started feeling like, well, come on, like Jamal said, and Klare knows, art is our superpower, right? You're sad, you make art. You're happy, you make art. You're in love, you make art. Art doesn't care. You can make it. That's our power. But I was like you. I was like, what's the purpose of mixing this blue when the world I'm looking at is insane? And other artists were like, well, we're always by ourselves anyways. You know? So now
took it a lot of different ways.
See what it feels like to be an artist, which is to be by yourself all the time. You know, it's kind of crazy.
And so some of the themes of the timeline. Then you have the section that includes essays and poetry and other writings by some of the artists. That's also included in the collection and included in the book. And in particular, I want to talk about Tony Chapman, who wrote these beautiful letters to her children. I thought they were particularly heartbreaking because she kept having the same refrain of, if I'm no longer here. And that made me think of the severity of what was happening and how much we were actually losing people. The actual experience of living and being here was not guaranteed. And so part of that is happening in the letters as she's talking to them, as these kind of wishes, as because maybe the threat of herself getting sick and not being here was so profound and on her heart while she was doing it. And I think that gave a real sense and look into the humanity that you were dealing with at the time.
Absolutely. Her work is just so poignant. It's interesting that you say that. I think that resonates with a number of the artists. Alan Edmonds, I had conversations with him with, my father is a John Henry, and he says, I've taken the time to make my will because I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow. So I think a number of artists were, somehow that comes through.
No, it's true. And again, as I said earlier in our conversation here, Brother Jamal, like, it would be such a different flavor if we had gone in and said to Tony, these are nice poems, but can you write us something about how your work is not really like, Gustav Klimt's work, but it's really, like, if we got into art talk, we would have lost that, right? So I think, again, we can always look at their work. I mean, Tani shows with Gallery Mertis, good friend, someone I really believe in. But the fact that she chose to write these letters showed that, as you said, the duality of purpose, right? I mean, she is here to make the art, which is to make her living, to provide for her children, to inspire other people who buy her work. But ultimately, that had to be contrasted against, that importance had to be contrasted against the reality of whether or not she, like many of us, were going to come out the other side. And when we did, what would the other side look like? And that's still being written, right?
Yeah.
Remember how they said, like, you couldn't have a 4-day work week? Excuse me? France, all these other countries, like, sorry, 4-day work week. England, 4-day work week. And how they said, oh, look at Elon Musk right now. He was a hero and a billionaire, and he was like the Hugh Hefner of our times. And then COVID came, and all of a sudden now COVID is gone, and his workers are like, we're not coming back to the office. And he turns into some like of a demi tyrant, like, oh no, you got to come back in the office because
you have a moral obligation to work.
Why are we going to work in the office? What is this? I mean, look at the positive side of the negative, right?
Yeah.
Look at the format we're using right now, like a Zoom-like, format, using this. What's it called? The program you're using, and then there's several others on the market.
Yeah.
That allow us to do, which none of us saw coming either. We lost real community. We lost real contact, which is the central element of human existence. Because nothing is real. The joke about if a tree falls in the forest, you're not there to hear it, is really talking about human existence. If you see something beautiful and you're the only one, did you see it?
Yeah.
Right? Did you see it? Did you dream it? Did you imagine it? Who's going to believe you? And art serves that purpose, to take emotion and experience and turn it into an object, a final object, or a process, or a time-based images that allow other people to become a companion to your own experiences, right? It doesn't matter what you do. Poetry, a poet doesn't just write poetry for him or herself. They use words we understand to trigger emotions we couldn't imagine. So it's always about how we talk about the truth, in quotes, of our own personal experiences to other people. And then hopefully we can add beauty to that, because the truth is in itself its own kind of beauty. Well, if we don't have anybody to talk to, that doesn't work. So all of a sudden, Zoom became a word, and everybody started Zooming, not only to funerals and terrible things, which made us feel sad, but all of a sudden we could build community virtually. As you know, I did the Shuga Wata thing with the Petrucci Foundation.
Yeah, let's get into that now.
That was fantastic.
Because as we talk about it, and we talk about what was revealed about humanity, I think, was the perseverance that happens and the overwhelming necessity of how we will start to build a community at any way possible, because we need it so much. Indeed. And the idea of connecting, that we will connect any way possible. And so maybe this whole Zoom like thing we were doing that was going to happen eventually, I think it accelerated, because
absolutely.
And in the end, we see the need for connection in any way that we can get it is acceptable, because that's how necessary it is for us to be able to maintain and survive and still be humans,
Right. But on a positive tip, at first it was like, oh, I hate it because, I'm not there at, forgive me, but my grandmother's funeral. I'm not there at my cousin's, and I'm talking for real now, in my real life. My cousin's funeral, my other cousin's funeral, my aunt's funeral, whatever. I couldn't be there. My best friend who died of cancer. And, most of the people had to mask up. Those who braved it, just like I braved it to go to Mo Brooker's funeral, and you're sitting in someone's funeral and wondering if that might be you. So there was always this risk. But at the same time, the reward was this. As we were saying before we went on air, and Klare and I have talked about, we were traveling down to DC recently to do the Chavis Chronicles, which was wonderful, a really good time. But we were talking about this on the train, about how, as I said to you, we had the situation where, as a sort of offshoot of that, some of the artists in the book and I, specifically Brother Stephen Kozar down in Greensboro, North Carolina, picked up on this and started a chop shop. And for 28 months now, approximately, every month between 4 and 15 artists, brothers, creatives, illustrators, painters, sculptors, ceramicists, the whole gamut are getting together. Usually we started for an hour, it winds up being like 3-4 hours. So desperate is the need for us just to talk to each other about what's going on in our lives. And instead of now it being a drag and a downside, we get to realize that we have formed a community that's so tight that we haven't actually met each other. So this July we're going to meet in North Carolina because we feel we know everything about each other. We know what each other's houses look like, our children look like.
Yeah.
We've had tons of conversations, but we now have, and we're not alone in this, these virtual communities that could not exist before. You had to get in a car, or get in a train or a bus to go meet somebody. Now we get to see each other that in a way that could not have been possible before. And frankly, it's wonderful. It's a lifesaver. It is an extension of shifting time. Time shifted. How, as you said, Jamal, how did we shift?
Yeah.
And we shifted by saying, we're going to make this work.
Yeah. And so that's another part in the book where you did these Shuga and Wata virtual talks. And we've seen them online, we've seen them on Instagram. The Adama with Fahama Peak who did the art salons. And like it was all kind of conversations happening because we still needed the conversation.
Yep.
Right. And we just didn't have a way to do it at the time. So we found a way to do it. And so all of these Shuga and Wata salons included Willie Cole, Delita Martin, Juan Logan, Alfred Conte, Latoya Hobbs, Curly Holton that you were talking about. A lot of these, have been on the podcast and that we love, the Studio Noize family. Louis Tanner Moore and all of these people. But I think what's important about the book is that you're presenting these virtual sessions as an official archive. And you write them up, and when you list the excerpts from it, you really get to see how these people were thinking in the same way that people would write a book or sit down and do some other kind of interview. This was the thing. And this is the true archive of what happened during those times. The ideas were still alive and being bandied about. And now you get to see how we were responding to it.
We'll give them a taste. Klare, you can pick up on this, but we, again, I give credit to Klare to just sort of the idea of taking what I had done and I had conceived of. And that's what's lovely about a collaboration, right? You have to, if it's going to work, you have to believe in what you do, but be ready to let go to those you trust. And Klare came up with this notion of doing these excerpts, printed excerpts from the Shuga and Wata, and it's wonderful. I mean, I was the guy who ran them. The first time I saw the transcripts, I was like, "Wow, that's what we said." Klare's what I think of.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting enterprise, and probably the more difficult part of the book for me, because the transcripts for most of them were like 30 pages each.
Wow.
And I had to sift through, and I was really careful not to change a voice or to make sure that whoever was saying something gave them enough space to say what they wanted and to get the picture next to them. And then I tried to get all of them kind of in sequence, maybe with a little conversation at the end. And that wasn't always easy. And got even more complicated when I sent them proofs, because if they start changing their words, then it starts changing the amount of words on the page. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh, got too much space here.
And that's where our partnership could come in, because Klare could go, Barris, can you talk to,
There was one Shuga and Wata where one of the artists, he just, I think some of his words were a little maybe uncertain, and he made his words more certain. It's his words. He can change his words however much he wants, but I had probably 7 or 8 lines at the end. And I ended up going back into the transcript and picking up a quote by another artist, which was, I thought, a little controversial, but I thought, this is good. This is powerful. This can be in here, and it can be a good ending. So I think it was the one on, was it the one on Reckoning? I'm not sure which one.
It might have been Alfred.
Powerful ending.
Yeah. But, again, I hope your listeners are picking up, is that Klare and I treated the book as an art project in itself, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mentioned it before. As things fell into place, it gave us ideas about how to, as Klare just expressed, how to tweak it so that it has a respect. And if I'm making art, I don't make art for the viewer. And I think about the viewer's experience, and I can use my mastery of the craft to in a sweet way manipulate or direct that experience. But I'm not trying to fool the viewer. I want the viewer to be vulnerable and enter into it and discover something about him or herself based on my voice. And I think that was very much why it was such a pleasure to work with Klare on this, because I think we wound up doing things that I think any other collaborators might have clashed about. And believe me, we clashed with a small c over this, that, and the other thing. And what was lovely was that the clash was really uh, uh, sensitive and intelligent disagreements. And it was like, if we're talking about COVID, where there was, people were taking up arms and storming the state capitol because they had to wear masks like poor people and whatever, there was all this tension. But putting the book together and working with Klare was a kind of a reminder of how great things are actually done. They're done with a level of respect, and you capitulate when it's necessary, and you stand up and fight when it's necessary, but you do it with dignity and with respect for the collaborator, so the collaborator can see through your eyes. I mean, this is all art stuff. That's why we're on the Studio Noize podcast. It's really about the process and the philosophy of negotiating when you make art, of negotiating art into the world, right? It's about a level of respect. And please, one of the hardest things about COVID, besides the fact that we had this invisible enemy that those who are used to demonizing people of color or women or trans or whatever, they didn't have an object they could demonize. Something was a threat to us that wasn't Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or the 5 Black Panthers who stood on the Lincoln Memorial 60 years ago. They didn't have a thing. And they did their best. The leader at the time called it the China virus. See, so we saw something. COVID was a revelatory, traumatic, human existence changing moment, right? It brought to the fore ways of thinking and imagining that simply were not allowed before at all. And if you thought like that, you were crazy. But then all of a sudden it happened, and crazy came out. Like crazy came out. And to be sane meant that you had to show evidence of empathy and forgiveness and kindness for your fellow man. That's why you wear a mask. You wear a mask in case you're sick. You don't want your grandmother, your friend's mother getting sick. So there was an inversion, not only of who was important in the culture and who we had, like you were saying about Instagram and scrolling. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and all the billionaires, they didn't do jack for me. The dude in the supermarket did something for me. He made sure I had evaporated milk. He made sure I had yeast. So it was a weird time, not only of stress and trauma and everything, but this inversion of what we thought our culture had to be wasn't. And so how do we show everybody else that's not an artist, how do we remind them of not only how crazy it was, but make them proud of their own resilience? Because we're all survivors now, right?
Yeah.
And the thing was to put together this time capsule that everybody can look back, that those who were angry can find anger, can find, those who couldn't work like me and you can find other artists who said, man, I couldn't work. Like Mario Moore. I mean, come on. Mario is, one of the greatest out there. And the fact that he shared the same kind of initial feelings about it like me, like Mario could just come up and sneeze, he can sneeze out a great painting just by thinking about it. And, so could a whole bunch of other artists there. But not every one of them was like, oh, yeah, I just got up and did my thing. A lot of them were like me and you, Jamal. They were like, man, I couldn't think. It was scary.
Yeah.
His painting in the book is beautiful. You've got the book in front of you. Maybe you can describe that for the audience. But it's him looking out the window, right? Watching TV. And out the window is like, January 6th. People forget January 6th was during COVID. It was insane.
Yeah. Yeah, do me a favor. Take me back to one of these salons. In particular, I really like the one the Black figuration, the rush to own Black bodies. Take me back to like how the conversation felt, if you know what I mean, not just the words, but like how necessary was it for those artists, the participants, the people that were watching to even be able to engage in a regular art conversation, like a conversation that's about art that did not have to do with all the perils and stuff that happened in COVID. Like it almost felt like a return to normalcy where we do finally get to discuss what was that thing we used to do? Do you know what I'm saying? Like yeah, we
Well,
used to we used
but
to talk and
also,
do stuff like about all kinds of high level stuff that wasn't so particular all the time.
well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I'll try my best to be concise. But there was a continuation, is what you're saying. There were some things that were continuing, and we had to kind of do a kind of Jedi mind trick of not think of this so that we could think of this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But while COVID was happening, I mean, businesses like Klare talked about in our recent interview, galleries are shut down. We had virtual exhibitions, right? We had all this stuff going on, but there were still people putting on masks and going out to auctions. You just sat further apart and whatever. And something that happened before COVID had spawned the idea for that particular project, Jamal, and that was sitting next to I don't want to just say wealthy, let's just say intelligent, erudite, wonderful Black collector that came up from DC. We're sitting next to each other in New York City auction at Swan. And he mentioned to me after we both agreed that we weren't going to try to outbid each other. He said, what he came for. I said what I came for. Then we decided we were going to be friends. And at one point, one of these pieces that was up, it might have been a Barclay Hendricks or something that people were fighting for, on the phone, blah 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 blah. And eventually, the auctioneer, got the right price, and he did the thing where, he hit the gavel and said, "Sold for 300 and whatever thousand or whatever it was for the price." And the gentleman leaned over to me and he said, "Don't ever forget that these same auction houses, and the same process of us purchasing the art of our people to preserve our culture, that same gavel used to sell our bodies."
Mm.
And it blew my mind because, at the time I was so busy trying to do good for the culture, trying to collect art that could tell stories after I'm gone, trying to quilt together a narrative that would be inspiring, that I had forgotten the obvious. And that comes back to COVID. And so I wanted to go back to talking about the uncomfortable, which was, COVID or not, Instagram was there. And you can, your listeners or informed people, they can remember there seemed to be just an incredible uptick in how many ways you could paint Black bodies. Were they Harry Marshall Black? Were they, and I mean this with kindness now, my brother Clarence down in North Carolina doing green faces, but then those were authentic. But then there were everybody looking at Instagram and going, "Oh, Tawny Chapman's doing this, and Monica Kegwa's doing this, so I'm going to copy that, but I'm going to make mine purple." My son calls them neon paintings. And like these bright
as if that was for some reason they thought that was the secret sauce. The color of the skin,
it wasn't about our
pigmentation,
about like how you could play with the term colored and blackness. And because it's Instagram, we would have like 200 people doing nonsense paintings by doing colors, but then we'd have 50 people doing something legitimate where they're playing around with tonality of skin, so forth and so on. Like Charles Edward Williams doing his thing, blah, blah, blah. So I just thought I'd put these two things together and try to talk about something that was difficult. And I won't name the gallery owner, but is a friend of mine. He's not Black, and he represents a lot of Black artists. And from what I hear, reasonably fairly in New York. And I called him up and personally asked him to be part of this. And he shied away. Understandably, right? It's his bread and butter. And I guess he might have felt that it could have been a, quote unquote, Me Too or a canceling moment if he concurred that we were in the middle of this kind of, global renaissance of Black art that did not need, quote unquote, white gallery permission. But at the same time, what was going on? Why were all these subpar images of Black bodies being sold just because somebody could make our faces and our features the texture of grass or whatever. Like what was going on? And I didn't have an answer. I wanted to have a meaningful conversation about the trend of Black bodies and whether or not we had moved forward from being on the auction block. So our literal bodies weren't on the block anymore, but the very same auction blocks were selling our visual representational bodies as ornate, exotic, all the negatives that were sort of, pinned on Black art for centuries.
Yeah.
All of a sudden our Black skin was the in. So it bothered me. And of course I had to be careful because in that conversation, the artists that I have and Klare hold in the highest regard, like Brother Alfred Conte, like Dr. Fahamu Piku. We're not using the same language with them. And so I wanted to have a conversation. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but I think we got some interesting things. And I think those people who pick up the book on Amazon will see that kind of thing. And I just want to say quickly, just before I send it back to you, that's another thing I'm really proud of working with Klare to create this project or this product, is that it's compartmentalized in a way that allows the reader to go deep in different aspects of the book. You can go deep in Shuga Wata and not look at any pictures. You can just open it and look at the images and think, my God, all these paintings were done in the first 12 to 15 months of COVID. They're not the same. Black people aren't making the same things. They don't have the same opinions. You could look at the timeline and look at a certain date when something happened in your life and think, oh, that's what's the headline in the newspaper. I remember now. So it's really trying to poke at, in a good way, and remind the viewers, not just of the experience of the artists who were in the book or the people who put it together, but of their own experiences. It is a book that demands, like a good painting or a good piece of art, that the viewer brings him or herself to the product, and they will find him or herself in the product. That's something I'm deeply proud of from the project.
And this is a question for both of y'all in terms of the artists that were included in the book. A lot of names that we've thrown out already, but let's add some more to Vanessa German, Ima Insei Ime, Dominic Chambers, Tony Chapman that we mentioned before, and so many more. That who was it in the book that really provided you with something that you connected with in particular, like for both of you? And it can be for any artist for any reason. Lavette Ballard, want to mention her too, one of the student Noize.
Yeah. Well, so many of the images and artworks resonated. I think for me, a lot of it really was about the communication and the relationships I have with the various artists, and some I became acquainted with for the first time, like Diane Smith, who I thought was fabulous. Barbara Bullock, I worked with personally on her essay, and Richard Watkins. And so, their works kind of, speak to me because I know them, and I can see, I don't know, I'm part of their experience, I guess. I don't know. But there's so many things in the book that are impressive and impressed me personally. Berrisford, I know you have some favorites. There was one in particular that there was only one work in the book that we went back and we asked the artist for something else, something you had seen. Remember?
What was that? I don't remember. What was that, Klare? We had so many conversations.
That was Toki's little boy.
Oh, come on. Toki Rome Taylor and Sachi Rome.
Oh, yeah.
Come
on. Another thing about the book, so many of these art projects are provincial, right? They only speak to a certain region. And you still see that trend in a lot of curatorial efforts, right? They're trying to be clever by being exclusive, and then what we get is that we get a singular vision of Black art. Now, I'm not, again, against this. It just can't be a standard model, like the Dirty South. I love it because it's holding up and saying, hey, you're not paying attention to what's happening in the South. And as we know, the relationship, of the existence of the African America cannot be extricated from the relationship between the North and the South. That's just our history. But then you have someone like Toki Rome Taylor who I was proud to be asked to write an essay for her book, which I recommend your listeners get, called Reclamation, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah.
Great book. And Toki and Sachi. But, you know, I'm happiest when I'm painting. And I never saw the collecting thing coming until Mr. Petrucci, Jim, called me up and asked me to do it. I said no twice, and then eventually I took it on. You know, I brought on a lot of experts like Lewis Moore, like Curley, you know, like the late Bill Hudson, people who could school me in the kind of book, collection I should put together. So it was very odd. But as the collection started to come together, my assistant at the time, Devin Briggs, would search the internet, search Instagram, and find people whose work she felt were akin to some of the other works in the collection, which made the collection more organic and less about somebody's money or whatever.
Right.
But the book, going back to this provincial thing, the book covers from Portland, Oregon, to Miami, to Little Haiti and Miami, to Connecticut, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. So really, even though it's a select group of African American artists, it's not a select group of young artists. It's not a select group of emerging artists. It's not a select group of established artists. There are a lot of bigger artists that both Klare and I know who could have been invited into to this project, but they were having major other exhibitions. We weren't going to bother them. So we really tried to reach out to artists that we felt would give a spectrum, not just of geographical location and spiritual connectivity to their own work and blah, 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 but ultimately would give a snapshot of an America that just happens to be Black America. Mm. It was really a snapshot of America during COVID, but we got Morel Doucette, who's one, and his partner, Stephen Boithe, who did those beautiful images that's on the cover and also in the book. And then we go to Toki, and she, back to this Black bodies thing, decorating Black bodies. It could be easy to dismiss Toki as someone who is dressing up beautiful Black children in retro European garb so that we can look at comparative analysis. And as Lewis Tanner Moore says, it's only legit if we can point to a white artist or a white person who did it first. Mm. So someone who's not fundamentally grounded in the history of this could make that mistake about Toki's work. That's not what she's doing. She's not dressing up these beautiful young Black children from her neighborhood, her own friends' children, to talk about, to say to the viewer, hey, if I put a little Black girl in pearls and feathers, doesn't she look like she belongs? What she's talking about is something much deeper, which, part of it is, we live in a culture where Black children can be, quote unquote, tolerated until a certain age. Up until a certain age, they're beautiful and cute and ornate and blah, da, 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 like an Urkel, Emmanuel Lewis kind of thing. And then all of a sudden they're 13 and they're thugs and killers and whatever. Yeah. The cliches take over. So Toki's work is interesting because she's taking the ornate things from her neighborhood that have to do with Yoruba culture and other kinds of religiosity and cosmology within Black culture, so that when you see a child standing in a beautiful lace dress, which goes back to the quilt traditions and the stitchery traditions in Black culture, and she'll find that lace dress, either have it made or have it buy it from a store, and then that child has her hair made up beautifully, but it's got cotton balls in her hair to talk about our legacy. And then the jewelry is pearls because they're pearls. It's natural and that has meanings. But then she's holding a mirror, hiding her face, which is protecting her spirit, according to Robert Farris Thompson's book. You have these multi-layered things, but you also have this beautiful photograph of a child. And so you, as she will readily say, you start to think about who are Black children and what part of their beauty and power of spirit is lost when we buy the oranges that America is selling about our own people. That's a different story than, don't they look cool in clothing from the 70s? Right. That is different. Yeah. And I think it's the same when you think about Kahinda Wali's work, where he takes bums off the street and paints them in, or the homeless or the indigent. I may not say bums, the homeless and the indigents, and paints them as royalty and regal. He's talking about reclaiming the spirit. and challenging us to look at ourselves as beings of value. Okay, no matter what people say about us, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, even if we're the ones dying disproportionately, like during COVID, even if we're the ones taking the brunt of it. Toki was producing these images of this beautiful black boy with these sort of different world specs on, and sitting there in his royal blue, looking like he could have ruled any nation in the world. That's a potent reminder while we're busy remembering all the hashtags.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's the good value of this book, man. So I'm going to end it with one of the sayings from your book. You said it's a lasting memo of this remarkable period. And I think that's what you have here. It's a wonderful book. I'm going to hold it up again so everybody can see it. This book, Shifting Time. Y'all go ahead and get this book.
Yes,
go ahead and get it. Like,
we don't get any residual profits off that. We got paid to do what we do. And we could have asked for a lot more, but it was about the book. And, I'm not 100% sure, but I've been talking to Jim and Claudia about, the nominal, quote unquote profit. We can't really make a profit, but if there's a 50 cents a dollar or whatever, that goes to a separate account and then the foundation. And we're hoping to be able to utilize that to feed that back into the circle of maybe providing scholarships for people in underrepresented.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Yeah,
that's
wonderful
a great
way to wrap it up.
To use the legacy to create legacy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's a statement in the book about all proceeds being donated to African American arts groups, and that is very, very important. And also, just to point out, it's available on Amazon. This is not a book that's going to sit in the storeroom of some museum and have no one see it, or to sit on some rich collector's shelf and have no one see. Well, hopefully it will sit on rich collector shelves, but it's available, it's accessible, and we priced it as low as we possibly, as low as Amazon allowed us.
And they've actually given a discount because we think we're selling so many units. So it's less than when it first came out. And just finally, to collectors, during COVID, near the middle to end of COVID, I was asked to go to Christie's auction house by Destiny, the collector, and and I gave a talk, and the talk was kind of preemptive about this, which is I realized how many major collectors, while I was talking to this group of like 250 masked people at Christie's, that they just didn't know the artists in the book. So again, Jamal, it'd be negligent if we signed off and didn't say, for those of you who are not sure about which artists are out there, for those of you who are used to seeing the same artists of color over and over again, this is not the book for you. This is the book for you that you can look through and go, I didn't know about Levette Ballard. I did not know about Charles Edward Williams. I did not know about Toki Rome Taylor and Sachi Rome Taylor. I did not know that the director of the Brandywine Workshop and Archive, the oldest Black printmaking institution since Bob Blackburn's spot, also did beautiful art. So it really is a compendium that we really hope will have people across the country looking through, contacting these artists, and helping to generate momentum from the ashes of COVID, from the trauma of without community. We hope that the book becomes a source material for collectors, for curators, for appreciators of fine art. So
historians.
For historians.
Yes.
For schools, we're in Florida now making our history legal. Well, now you can buy our book like you're buying moonshine. You can smuggle it in and have your kids look at some artists and go, "Oh my God, maybe I can move to Arkansas and see this work."
They will wrap it in a black plastic bag so you
yes.
so
it's sad, but it's true. But that's America.
It is. And I think it's important how I use this podcast a lot for that same reason too. That no, I don't have the big names on every single week, but I have the people that you need to know. And I think there's a lot of good work being done that needs to be celebrated just as much as the high profile people that you'll see in the High or in the Guggenheim or wherever that is. It's
Julie
more
May
art
Ray
than
too.
just that being done.
Julie May Ray too. I went to see her show 3 times at the Whitney, and bless my partner Klare, just shoots out in the dark and says maybe she'll do it. Now imagine how how blessed we are that someone of that caliber, as you were just saying, Jamal, somebody of that level who does not need to do this book at all, looked at the concept and obviously felt that was meaningful enough to agree to participate. That was the case for several others. So that was, for us to wrap it up, the most important endorsement, or that the people that are above us and are quote unquote more important than us saw the project as something that possibly had lasting value.
Absolutely. So we're gonna make sure y'all get it as we go. Tell people where they can get in contact with y'all and where they should be looking.
Amazon, just Google it. Shifting Time.
That's for the book. I'm on Instagram at Verbena2160. If you can't find a 6'4" black man named Berrisford with one arm, you ain't trying hard enough, man. Just look up my name and you'll see what I'm up to. And Klare and I are open. If you want to contact us for any projects you have in mind.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're in LinkedIn and stuff like that. So, again, we get nothing from this except the beauty of being able to share it through, the medium like Brother Jamal's studio Noize, which is respected, and the pleasure of knowing that our project is appreciated and of interest. That's all we get.
That's what's up. It's the joy of art, baby.
Yes,
it's the Noize. Make sure
thank you so much, Jamal. This is
Jamal. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all for coming on.
We've been trying to get together for a bunch of years right now.
I think it's
finally break the ice. Maybe we can do another one on Chop Shop.
I think it's an important book, and people need to make sure they pay attention to it.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
Thank you.